Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel and welcome to our London system series. So in this series we're following this London system from White's perspective, and I think this is a very important series because so far we have covered 3 openings as Black on my YouTube chess channel, so now we could have also great preparation while playing as White, and when we solve the London system then you could have really a great opening preparation for both sides, for Black and White. So it's really important to have a very nice repertoire in chess to compete really in a decent level. So you have to be prepared. You have to know where the sidelines are going, and I think we're not covering maybe too many sidelines. So I'm not going to explain this London system what happens if that happens. I'll explain you this London system with its common strategical ideas and the common tactical ideas can happen in this very nice opening. So today we'll see now a couple of traps. I've prepared some traps for you while playing as White, the London system. So I think they're really cool, and I think they can be useful because they come out really out of normal setup. So it's not that you're playing a dubious move and then your opponent falls into a trap. You're playing basically this normal London system setup, and then your opponent could have some troubles. That's why these traps are important to realize, and that's why they're also instructive, because I'm not going to show you, for instance, a trap in a King's Gambit because the King's Gambit is basically a bad opening, but this trap comes really out of natural setup. So at the end of the video, I'm going to analyze also one Magnus Carlson game. I think it's very important to follow the world champions games in the London system, because in my opinion he's the best player in this London system. So when we maybe finish the London from White's perspective with 50-60 videos, then we'll have also 50-60 games covered by Magnus Carlson. As I said, in my opinion, we should really hang on to his setups, and his setups are really great, and his attacking performances in this London setups are really great. So that's why we'll have, as I said, in every video one Magnus Carlson. So I hope Magnus doesn't mind, but as I said, in my opinion, he's really the best London system player. So let's now see our first trap. D4 here, D5, bishop to F4, knight to F6, knight to F3. We're building our positional London system setup. After the move C5, this could happen to you, a normal aggressive move by Black, and we'll cover this line and some other lines with C5, Queen to B6, like the poison pawn variation. We will cover all of that in the continuation of the London, but this video is only for traps. So here E3, knight to C6. So you see, there is one tricky idea about Black's setup. He doesn't want to play immediately something like E6 to lock his light for bishop. After the move knight from B to D2, he plays a very active move, bishop to G4. And this idea could be really tricky because no one likes to be pinned in chess, but still we are building our normal London system setup. This is now the compact setup in the center with this very nice activity of the dark square bishop, but with the great flexibility of this bishop. So this bishop can move to E2, D3, or even to B5. So in this continuation, my recommendation is to play the move bishop to B5. We're creating sort of an absolute pin. The absolute pin is the pin directed here against the king. This is not an absolute pin. That's the most important thing to realize, because still our knight on F3 can move. So that's the difference between the pin here on the queen and this absolute pin, because this knight on C6 is stuck there. So bishop to D6. So it's still a great setup here for Black. You see, nothing went wrong. So far Black has played a very active game with the minor pieces, and as we usually said in my London system introduction video, the whole game now in these types of setups, when we have the static center setup, for instance the Queen's Gambit declined setups, in the Semislav setups, or in this Tarash setups, for instance E6, D5, C5, then the whole battle is around the E5 square. So you see, White has attacked with the bishop the E5 square. White is attacked with the knight the E5 square. The bishop is attacking the knight, which is controlling the E5 square. So everything is simply based around the square E5. Our common goal, as I said also in my introduction video, so please, when you start to watch this London system, watch them from the beginning, from introduction video, then part 1, part 2, and so on. So okay, here after the move bishop to D6, we see we have now again a move which battles for the E5. So it is again a double attack on the knight, which is controlling the E5. Our main goal, as I said, is to play an outpost on E5. Here after move queen to f5, castling was played, and now bishop to c6. So the best way here for black probably is to proceed with the move bishop to f4. But now comes our trap, because if our opponent plays b takes c6, then we have bishop takes d6, queen to d6, and now knight to e5. And here comes the problem. Black wants to compete now, of course. We have occupied finally our e5 square, but black wants to compete here with the knight and tries rook to c8, tries to protect the pawn, but now comes the tricky part, knight to g4. After knight to g4, we have a great tactic, d takes c5, and you see the knight is hanging. So this is the trap. As I said, it can happen to you. It happened to me a couple of times. I managed to pull off this trap because I saw one game, and this instructive game, it was Jan Rubes against Milan Orsak. So I will show you all of the PGNs in the description below, so you can maybe analyze some sidelines for yourself at the beginning of the series. But as I said, I think this is really a cool trap because they are really natural moves. The c6 pawn is hanging. Basically, the best way now from this point on for black is to proceed bishop to h5 and simply leaving the pawn hanging. But as I said, in the beginning, after the move bishop to c6, maybe a better idea is here bishop takes f4, and black has some opportunities. It's an equal game. But as I said, if your opponent plays b takes c6, then bishop to d6, queen to d6, knight to e5, really tricky. And now knight to g4, d takes c5, and the knight is hanging. The knight is decoyed to the 4th rank. So let's see now another example. It's a game played by Kirill Georgiev against Daoud Tahiri. Here d4, knight to f6. Again, we're building our London system setup. This is now so far a Queen's Indian setup, or maybe a Nimzo Indian preparation. Here c5 was played. Still we're playing the move e3, and now comes b6, which is also sometimes a natural move. It is a great idea. So far, you see, after the move c5, black doesn't get what he wanted. He basically wanted to go into a Nimzo Indian setup. Now, because we didn't play c4 or similar ideas, the pinning idea doesn't work. So that's why black needs to have a compact position here on the queen side and tries the normal move bishop to b7 with normal Queen's Indian or Nimzo Indian setups with move knight to e4, getting this knight on a very active square. But now knight to d2, again we're building the same London system setup, and now you see this is now already a dubious move, because still we have a great opportunity to play a very tricky move, knight to c4. The problem now about black's setup is that the d6 is a little bit weak, so that's why d5, you can see in some occasions the move d5, then knight to e5, and now h6. If you don't play h6, let's play something like bishop to e7, then bishop to b5 is really tricky. It's even worse, even if you try bishop to d6, then bishop to b5, you see you have to cover with your knight here, but there are now tactical threats on the bishop. Knight to d7, see, you have to take with the knight, and now bishop to d6, the bishop is lost. So that's why here after the move knight to e5, a6 was played, and now knight to g5. This is really tricky because the pawn on f7 is unprotected, and again black has many troubles here to handle. So queen to c8, knight takes f7, simple idea, rook to g8, and now bishop to d3. This game is basically lost because also this pawn is lost. And after queen to h5, you see we're getting another attacker into the game. Here in this position, black resigned because there's also double check threat here with knight to d6. But let's go back. Very important thing to realize, after the move b6, if your opponent doesn't play the move d5, then the move knight to c4 is really tricky. Here after the move d5, already some troubles, knight to e5 and a6, knight to g5. So let's see now another example. Here d4, d5, knight to f3, again this London system setup. Here e3, bishop to g4, here bishop to b5, where here black played really an aggressive way, didn't play even the move knight to c6 like in our previous example. Here bishop to b5, bishop to d7, and now bishop to d3. Here queen to b6, and in my opinion, whenever you face the queen to b6 idea, you should most of the times go into this poison pawn variation. So with knight to d2, if now black takes the pawn on b2, then we still have rook to b1 and attacking the pawn on d7. So knight to c6, we have d takes c5. That's now the tricky part of this opening, because the queen didn't react immediately with the move queen to b2. Now it's time really to continue our pressure against the queen. Queen to c5 and now a3. This is a very important move as it cuts off this very important square for the queen. It's the square b4. So now your opponent could make a mistake and play knight to h5 to chase your bishop, but now bishop to c7 is already really a tricky idea, because the best way now here to proceed probably for black is to play the move e6 to get off, to get at least some kind of an activity with the queen, to hide with the queen, or maybe even a6, maybe to hide with the queen to a7. But now after the move bishop to c7, here black tried rook to c8, but now the problem is that the queen gets trapped with the move knight to b3. So there are many times these tactical threats on the queen when the queen gets out in the London system, because you see there is always this bishop's activity. It will not happen many times to you that will actually trap the queen, but as I said, watch sometimes if the queen is endangered, if the queen doesn't have good opportunities to escape. You see now in this example black get punished because simply this d takes c5 idea was a tricky one, and black fell into a trap. So let's see now the normal poison pawn trap. It happens many times. d4, d5, knight to f3, knight to f6, bishop to f4, and now again this idea c5, e3, queen to b6. Now my recommendation is to play the move knight to c3, and here after move queen to b2, black is already lost, because we have now knight to b5 with threatening the fork on the rook and the king. Queen to b4, it's not a problem. Still we have c3 idea. So here black has to play the move knight to a6, and now comes the tricky part, rook to b1. You see that queen is trapped. You cannot play anymore queen to b4. You cannot play queen to a3 or queen to c3. So you have to take the pawn. That's the main problem. But now rook to a1, attacking the queen, and now after the queen moves to b2, we have a great tactic. Rook to a6, b takes a6, and you have knight to c7. Again, the fork, king and the rook. So this poison pawn is really tricky. The queen gets endangered. You get at least some kind of a tempo. You get some kind of an activity with your pieces, and I think you should always consider the option to trap the queen when your opponent goes after the pawn on b2 or plays a very active move queen to b6. So we'll come also to this part, as I said in my continuation of the series, about this queen to b6 idea, c5 ideas, poison pawn ideas, also with some King's Indian ideas. So we'll cover all of that in continuation of the London. So now it's time for the Magnus Carlson game. It's really great and instructive one. He played against Marin Bosiocic. Marin Bosiocic is here the best player in Croatia. He won the 2019 Croatian Chess Championship, so he's a strong player, although of course not so strong as Magnus. But here it's really a battle between two top grandmasters, and you see how Magnus will play this very nice London. So d4, d5, bishop to f4, knight to f6, e3, c5. We have c3 here by Magnus. Again, a different move order, but the same setup. So here knight to c6, knight to d2, we have e6, and now knight to f3 by Magnus. Here we have a different line in which black didn't activate the light square bishop, tried here a bishop to d6 to compete against the dark square bishop. And I've mentioned that in my introduction video of the series, that it's not such a bad thing if even black manages to trade off the dark square bishop on f4, because then if that happens, if we trade off basically a good piece, our bishop is on f4 is a good piece, black's piece on d6 is also a good piece. So basically we trade two good pieces off the board, but still we're continuing the game with a great bishop, which has a great activity. On the other hand, black is continuing the game with a bad bishop, which is blocked out by its own pawn on e6. So that's why it's very important to compete the battle around this e5 square. Our main goal, as I said, in this static setup, that's a setup when you have this d4 and d5 pawns collision. So basically no pawn moves are possible here, although the pawn structure is dynamic. But even after c takes d4, e takes d4, still it's a static center. So no pawn movement in the center is possible. So as I said, in these types of setups, we should search for outposts. So that's why this knight to e5 idea is our main goal. Here, bishop to g3, played by Magnus. First of all, you shouldn't allow your opponent to take. Bishop takes f4, e takes f4, c takes d4, and c takes d4. You see it creates a weird pawn structure. You could have pawn islands on d4 and f4. So that's why bishop to g3. If now black takes, bishop takes g3, h takes g3, you're continuing the game with opportunities to play bishop to d3, aiming against the h7 pawn, but also with bishop to b5, attacking the knight, and also battle for the e5 score. So as I said, e5, e5, e5. It's all about that in the London. So after the move bishop to g3, castling was played, and now bishop to b5, again battling for the e5 square. Knight to e7. Here Marin Bosiocic doesn't want to compete with this light square bishop. Leaves a little bit now the e5 unprotected. We have bishop to d3. Okay, Magnus says, I'm going back now and play on my other idea. We are playing now on the bishop to d3, rook to h7 idea. But black has lost the tempo. Now, if knight to c6 happens, it's again our move, and again we could occupy the e5 square. So b6, we have e4 immediately by Magnus Carlson, creating a pawn breakthrough, because black played this passive knight to e7 move, and now with this great control with the minor pieces, you see all of the pieces are really centralized. So you should sometimes play pawn breakthrough. Really risky idea, although with the king in the center. But as I said, the pieces, these crowded pieces in the center, are allowing us also now to play e5 pawn breakthrough, e4 pawn breakthrough. After the d takes e4, we have knight to e4, knight to e4, and now bishop to e4, attacking the rook. Rook to b8, and now a very nice move here by Magnus Carlson. He takes c5. So okay, you could take with the bishop, but you're losing the rook, of course. So that's why you see this bishop's activity is always present in the London system. So that's why here bishop takes g3 was played, and now after h takes g3, we have now a new position where black has now the weakness on h7. And here Marin Bosiocic plays f5. Even if you try queen to d1, rook to d1, and now the problem for black is that black would love to take with a tempo here, d takes c5, and then opening the b file, but it's not a possibility, as you said. So you have this tactical threat on h7. So that's why here Marin Bosiocic tried f5, and Magnus simply takes. We have rook takes d8, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and now very cool move, we have c6, because if you take f takes e4, then we have c7. The promotion idea is clear here. You will lose rook, and although you could take maybe here the knight, but first we'll of course promote here, pardon me, better here to promote to d8, then it comes with the check. So you see the fork idea, really nasty threat by Magnus Carlson. Here he played c6 in the game, knight to d5, and now we have bishop to d5. Again, I hope you realize, again, we have this bad bishop position. I've talked about that really in the beginning of the video and also in my introduction video. So sometimes it's really good to go positionally into this game, because now you see the bishop is simply blocked out by this light square bishop, and still we're having clear targets. There are now dark square problems here in black's position. In the game, Magnus tried to simplify the position, because he has a 4 versus 2 situation on the queen side. So now it's really time to go into an endgame. So rook to d1, king to d1, bishop to a6, and now knight to e5. We have rook to c8. Here, very nice move, c4. You see the knight is protecting everything. Again, we got our knight to e5 outpost, sort of. Again, the same goal, but really in a more simplified line. We could even support even further the move, the knight with the move f4, but again, e5, e5, e5. So I'm a little bit boring with that idea, but as I said, it's really important to realize this knight outpost on e5. So b5, here played by Bosiocic. We have b4, a great move here by Magnus. First, he gives up the pawn, but now a4, great pawn connection, creating really this nasty pawn chain. Rook to d8, a check, not a problem. King to c2, it's only a check. Rook to d5, and now f4. In this position, Marin Bosiocic resigned. Again, we have the clear plan b5, then a6, a5, b6, connecting 2 pawns on the 6th rank, and it's game over here for for Marin. Marin, of course, recognized that lost, and he barely resigned the game. So I hope you realize these ideas. As I said, there are now some tactical threats. You saw some traps. The main strategies about London are, of course, built around this attack on e5. At the end of the video, I wanted to show you also here a tactic. It's also from a London system game. Try to find now the best continuation. I hope you can solve the video. I'm not going to solve that for you. You can have fun at home. It's a forced checkmate sequence sort of, and I think you can solve it. This is, I think, an easy tactic. So as I said, we'll continue to follow this London system series. I think you get the grip. It's really important to recognize the patterns. The London system will continue the series also with some Slav defense setups, Benoni setups, King's Indian setups, and many, many more. If you want to see my introduction video from the series, here's the link of our very nice preparation as white. And if you have troubles to play as black, check out my Hyper Accelerated Defense series and King's Indian and the Nimzo Indian Defense series, in which I show you nice and effective ways how to play as black. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best of